Over the years of being involved in people's lives, both as a volunteer lay minister and then as a clergy person, it has become clear to me that everyone's life has ups and downs. Everyone's life has both pleasant seasons and some stretches of agony. Even the people who tell me that they haven't had anything really terrible have often had difficulties to endure. In fact, they may have described their own difficulties as being not so bad because they lined up their struggles against the challenges of other people's lives, and when they did so, whatever they were facing didn't seem as horrible as the other person has endured. The death of a child, a diagnosis and treatment of cancer, the foreclosure of a home, the adultery of a spouse or a partner, or even one's own infidelity. But over years of companioning people, I've seen that it's not the event that defines whether the thing is traumatic. It's the person's experience of the event that makes it difficult. It may not be the event itself, but the bells that start ringing in one's consciousness or subconscious mind as the result of a triggering event. Suffering is part of everyone's life, and one of the tasks of the Christian is to practice how to know oneself as beloved at the same time that the events of one's life are saying just the opposite. Part of what it means to be a child of the resurrection is to be able to believe in one's healed life in God, even when one's circumstances testify to one's brokenness. Whether the problem is poverty or cancer, joblessness or abandonment, the challenge is to know oneself as beloved even when one feels overlooked, abandoned, or betrayed. There are lots of spiritual practices in our Christian tradition, and what I'm speaking of this weekend is the spiritual practice of making peace with where we are so that we can be anchored to where we shall be. Making peace with where we are so that we can be securely anchored to where we shall be. This could even become a mantra or a prayer that we repeat to ourselves, writing it on a slip of paper and sticking it in our pocket and looking at it a couple times a day. Making peace where we are, with where we are, so that we can be securely anchored to where we shall be. Now, for clarity's sake, this where we are is not necessarily a geographical place. Where we are may be described as much by our mental outlook or our emotional state. Where we are might have to do with our employment status, our physical health, our spiritual state, or anything. So let's think about where we are as being metaphorical. At any given moment, we are somewhere, and there's something about the human condition that makes it true that this somewhere is very likely not to be where God understands us to be. The reality we have in our heads, the reality in our mind's eye, is so often not the reality that God sees. What God sees is that we each are beloved, and that having received the grace of God to become children of God through the gift of God's adoption, we are even now raised with Christ. Today, not at a later time, but today, we are raised with Christ. So then we are already what we are not yet. In some mysterious way, we are already what we are not yet. We are already enjoying our consummation with God, which is the perfect fulfillment of every created life. The confusing thing about being human, however, is that while we are right now God's beloved and are in God's holy presence, we are simultaneously organic and broken. And as organic and broken creatures, we experience all kinds of things. Boredom, pain, depression, fatigue, and other symptoms of our humanity. Well, how can that be? How can I simultaneously have a hip that hurts and be the beloved of God? How does that work? It's so hard to hold these two disparate things together. So hard, in fact, that humanity has made up all kinds of reasons to explain how it could be that I am both blessed and suffer at the same time. You've heard these speculations too. They sound like these. Yes, we are God's beloved, but because of original sin, we suffer. Yes, we are God's beloved, but our pain and suffering make us stronger. And so God gives us the grace to endure so that we can grow. Not sure I'm interested in that kind of growth. Or the most heartbreaking, and the one I hear often at the bedside of someone who is approaching the end of his or her life. They say something like, I know I've been taught that God has blotted out my sins, and in a way, I've believed that all my life, but I'm still not sure that God claims me as his own. Because if God did claim me, then why would I be suffering like this? Or perhaps the most tragic and destructive of all speculations. Since I'm suffering, I must have done something wrong. God must not have forgiven me yet. Because if God had forgiven me, then this awful thing wouldn't have happened. We are beloved, and we suffer. It's hard to hold these two truths together, but it's worth the effort. It's worth the effort of making planned efforts to remember that we are God's beloved. Reminding ourselves of what we heard last night. That Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me." That Jesus said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them." We have to remind ourselves. I'd like to leave the question of why we suffer to the systematic theologians who do that kind of stuff. I'm more concerned with our pastoral reality. Since we do, how can we, at the same time we are hurting, keep hold of the equally true reality that we are God's beloved? How can we build into our habits a practice of being the beloved, such that when the difficult days come, The pain we experience does not blot out the blessedness we feel. How can we practice being the beloved such that when the storms come, we do not become unmoored from the safe harbor of God's love? How can we become strong in our habits of making peace with where we are so that we can be anchored to where we shall be, which really is the throne of God? How can we hold these two seeming opposites together? The poet Mary Oliver gives us a hint.